suppose I have to rely on the battery I have.
Either they do, I can do for you.
You have power here.
Actually, you need a power.
Good.
Well, namaskar and good evening, everyone. My name is Rahul Pandita and I'm the president of KP Midwest community. On behalf of our community, I would like to thank each and every one of you for your support and help. This event would not have been possible without your kind support and all the help. So thank you again. Thanks so much for coming down during the weekday. Most of you must be wondering what this event is about. Let me begin by telling you where we come from, where our home was. Kashmir is a legendary beautiful mountainous region in the northernmost state of India. In the 17th century, Mughal Emperor Jahangir set his eyes on the valley of Kashmir, and he said, if paradise does exist anywhere on earth, it is here, it is here. Before 1989, this beautiful magical place was our home. The population was 95% Muslims and 5% Hindus. We all lived in peace and harmony until one day an evil spell was cast and our nightmares began. Kashmiri Muslim terrorists engaged in attacks on Kashmiri Pandits, who had been residents of Kashmir Valley for centuries. So it began, the purging of Kashmiri Pandit community in a violent ethnic cleansing, and it continued till the vast majority of Hindus were evicted out of Valley. After having suffered many acts of violence, sexual act on women, arson, torture, extortion of property, 350,000 Kashmiri Pandits were forced to leave their homes and spend the rest of their lives in exile in their own country. The unspoken chapter, because we are the forgotten people. Nobody saw our pain. Nobody heard our cries. Have you ever seen Indian Parliament having a discussion on Kashmiri Pandits? I don't think so. Have you ever seen human rights activists talking about Kashmiri Pandits? Not again. We are a community of forgotten people. The politicians might turn their back, but we will not cease to exist. Not only that we exist, we will thrive. And remember, as Elie Wiesel, a famous Holocaust writer, once said, for the survivor who chooses to testify, it is clear his duty is to bear witness for the dead and living. He has no right to deprive future generations of a past that belongs to our collective memory. To forget would not be dangerous, but offensive. To forget the dead would be killing them a second time. Time passes and memories fade, but hearts never forget, and we should not. My name is Vishal, a Kashmiri Pandit, and I am today here, along with my community, to remember and remind people that we do exist. I am here to say we are not the forgotten people, and our stories will be told. History will bear witness that Kashmiri Pandits paid a very heavy price for being Hindus, for being loyal to India. The Kashmiri Pandits who spilled their blood in Kashmir for being loyal Hindus and Indians, if they are watching us today from above the sky, we should shout and tell them that they did not lose their lives in vain. We will remember and make sure that our future generations do remember us. Jai Hind.
We're trying to fix the mind. Thank you, Vishal.
The oxygen, you have to.
Thank you, Vishal. Mr. President. Can't follow him.
Yeah, that's
Are you
fine. Yep.
Most of you know me. However, those of you who don't, I'm Nikki Paul, who has had the privilege of serving this community. Serving as past chapter president, along with our debonair Raj Paul. I must say that in spite of its ups and downs, it has been a joyride of a lifetime. So on behalf of all of us, it is my privilege to welcome our guest speaker today to the town of Naperville, which claims to have the largest number of community members. So we would like to believe. Everything that is Kashmiri happens in this town. All the shots are fired here. So welcome home to the home of the Pandits in exile in the great town of Naperville. I had the opportunity of getting acquainted with Rahul in the 90s. I don't remember the year. It was through his writings on Deepak Chopra's blog, the guru who first appeared on the miracle scene with his magic potions of eternal youth and remedies for the soul. His writings were very touching and soulful and left a marked impression on my mind. A renowned journalist in the field of political commentary, Rahul works as an associate editor with the Indian Newsweek magazine. He is the best-selling author and award-winning journalist and is the recipient of the 2010 International Red Cross Award for conflict reporting. He has reported from the front lines of conflict, from Iraq, where he was captured by Saddam Hussein's dreaded Republican Guard in 2003, to Sri Lanka, bringing alive for his readers many theaters of severe human conflict. Rahul is in the United States for a lecture tour of leading universities and think tanks across the country to bring to light the unrecorded and untold story of the Kashmiri Hindu Exodus through a first-hand narrative of his family's trial and travails of becoming refugees in their own country. So please give me a hand and give an applause to Rahul Pandita, the author of our story, Our Moon Has Blood Clots. Rahul, the stage is yours.
Can you hear me without the mic?
Yeah, I can.
That's wonderful.
We can turn it off.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and namaskar to all of you. It's a privilege standing here tonight in front of all of you. And I've been in the United States for the last 2-3 days. Now I think I've met more Kashmiri Pandits here in the last 2-3 days than I've ever met in India or anywhere else. So it's a pleasant experience. I've been a journalist for about 16-17 years, and I'll tell you a small story and then I'll come back to our story. I was a young journalist in 2001 when one day my office decided to send me to Kashmir. I've been going to Kashmir since 1998 as a journalist. The way left, my family had left Kashmir like everyone else, most of us, in 1990. In 1990 I was 14 years old when my family and hundreds of thousands of others were forced into exile as an Islamist insurgency broke out in the Kashmir Valley. So in 2001, in April 2001, is it? Is it?
I'll give you a different mic, sir.
Yeah.
Give a different mic.
Yeah, you can reduce the volume.
Hello, can you hear me now? Yeah.
It is better.
It is. 2001, I was sent by my office for an assignment to Kashmir. At that point of time, there were not many places one could stay. There were very few hotels at that point of time. And it was a conflict zone as it remains now. But the condition in 2001 was much worse than what it is today. So at the Delhi airport, on that balmy afternoon, April afternoon, I met a friend of mine who used to work as a photojournalist for the Hindustan Times. His name was Pradeep Bhatia. Now Pradeep and I have met each other many times in Delhi during various assignments. And I met him at the airport and I said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to Srinagar." "How about you?" I said, "I'm going to Srinagar too." We spoke to each other and we realized to go into the same hotel, which is a hotel called Adus on the Residency Road, for those of you who are aware of the hotel. Now both of us went and we took a common taxi from the airport and we went to the hotel, checked in, and then we went to the cantonment area to meet a friend of ours. And then towards the evening, early evening, we returned back to the hotel because after 6 o'clock it was a virtual curfew. Everyone would rush back to their homes. So we sat together till late in the night, had a couple of drinks, had dinner together. Pradeep, I remember, was singing some Kishore Kumar songs, and it went on till midnight. After which we retired to his room and I did to mine. In the morning, I was having breakfast in the lobby, hotel lobby, and Pradeep was also there, when we heard a very loud bang somewhere nearby. It was so near that the window panes, etc., started to shatter. And we knew that the bomb blast had happened very close to where we were. Now it's Kashmir, it's a conflict zone, we know that it's been a bomb blast, so we rushed out. And in the lane next to Adus, we found out that the bomb blast had happened and a couple of policemen had died in the blast. My colleague, my friend Pradeep, started taking pictures furiously of what was left of the site. And there was a white ambassador car there, which was intact. And I was waiting for my cameraman to come and I kept my shoulder on that white ambassador car. Must have been about a minute or so and Pradeep is still there, he's clicking pictures. Suddenly I heard someone calling my name from behind. And I turned and it's a BSF officer I used to know from my earlier assignments. So we got talking, we sort of embraced each other and he said, "When have you come?" I said, "I've come yesterday, sir." He kept his hand on my shoulder and led me away from this site. Must have been about 15, maybe 20 seconds. And he started talking to me, he said, "You should never visit such a site immediately because," and I remember he never completed his sentence. And in the hindsight, when I think about that incident, I think before my mind registered it, my legs had started to shake, and it felt as if I had passed through a wall of fire. And I touched my lips, I could see explosive powder on the lips. And I turned behind, there was a JNK police commando. His whole body was simmering. And he was clutching an AK-47 rifle in his hand. So he walks from here till the speaker and he collapses and he dies. There's a young boy, aged about 12, maybe 14. He's standing outside an emporium, a small showroom. And he's so shocked with the impact that he's crying and saying in Hindi, yelling in Hindi, "Saab maine kuch nahi kiya, saab maine kuch nahi kiya." Later we realized that the second bomb blast which happened, that RDX, which was used to cause an explosion, was put in that white ambassador car on which I very diligently kept my elbow. And Pradeep was so close to that car that he was blown into pieces. So I lost a friend that day. But that's not all we lost in Kashmir, ladies and gentlemen. My mother comes from Baramulla in North Kashmir, and she was a toddler when the Marathi tribesmen from the northwestern frontier province came, along with regulars from Pakistani army, and they ravaged village after village before they were contained just before Srinagar. And whatever my maternal grandfather had built all his life was finished, was reduced to ashes on one particular day in a matter of minutes. Now in the 70s, they had to immediately, in 47 itself, my mother's family had to shift from Baramulla to Srinagar, and they became refugees for the first time in their own state. In the 70s, in the late 60s, my mother and father got married, and in the 70s, they started building up again. They started rebuilding their lives again, and built this small house in a Srinagar suburb, which was built by my father's provident fund and my mother's jewelry, bridal jewelry. That also was taken away from us in the spring of 1990 when we lost everything again. Now this idea of home, it's a universal theme. It is a dream which all of us have. It has a certain universality to it. In America also, I believe that it is a cherished dream of every American to have a house. But I think in the case of the Kashmiris, it is an idea which is very central to our existence. Back then in the 70s and 80s, when we were growing up in Kashmir, there was no concept of fixed deposits or mutual funds or stocks and bonds. So everything that a middle class family had was put in Kashmir, put in the house. So everything we put in the house was akin to our identity, and that identity, ladies and gentlemen, was lost again in 1990. Now, what has happened in 1990, all of us know that. A few incidents I would like to repeat for those of us who are not Kashmiris and who don't know what has happened. On the night of from 88, 89 onwards, we began to hear murmurs on the streets, inside our houses, neighbors talking about it, that some men, young men, had crossed over to Pakistan and were being imparted training in arms and ammunition. I remember, I used to live in the Srinagar suburb, and every morning I would cycle to a very wide road just behind my house, which was a bypass road. And we could see these men really training hard, and we did not know what they were up to. We never experienced that before in Kashmir. Many of our neighbors, friends, relatives, they reported seeing these young men running up and down the hills of Shankaracharya and Hari Parvat. It is only later we realized that they were training for something big, which was to hit us in a few months from then. We also heard a lot of murmurs, and I wonder now, after 23 years, that we never spoke to each other about our signals. And no matter who I speak to, even here in this small room, I've spoken to 3-4 people, and they tell me the same stories. In the 80s, my family was renovating the third story of my house. And this milkman used to come to our house, and he would often joke with us, and I would fight with him over Petish, who's a cricket, whether Imran Khan is a bigger cricketer or Sri Khan is a bigger cricketer. And this guy, all the time, he would say, "Oh, Panditji, you're renovating your house. Why are you wasting money on this house? Tomorrow, or maybe day after tomorrow, this house will belong to us." And this is something which all of us have heard in Kashmir, But we were so naive about these things that we never realized that one day this will come true. Now, of course, for centuries we have faced a lot of religious persecution in Kashmir, and there have been many unpleasant incidents even during the 14 years I spent in Kashmir. But we were like submarine as a religious minority. Whenever such an unpleasant incident happened, we would keep our head low, hoping for things to pass. And most of the times they passed, and then everything would be back on the track and we would go on with our lives. But that was not to be after the September of 1989, when the killings began. Initially we thought that it is something, these are very selected targets. Maybe a political activist has been killed, maybe a high court judge has been killed, maybe another prominent person has been killed. But then all our hopes were put to rest, they were all shattered on the night of 19th January 1990. There's a Jewish equivalent to it. I'm very aware of the sense of proportion, and I normally do not like to compare it with the Jewish Holocaust. But what we went through on the night of 19th January 1990 was our own Kristallnacht, if you know what I mean. It was a harsh winter night, and we had just gone to sleep when these noises from the neighborhood mosque started troubling us. And when the mob in hundreds of thousands were gathered on the streets and in all these religious places started shouting slogans against us, I would like to put a couple of them on record. One of them went something like this, and that scared us a lot, ladies and gentlemen. Asigas Panni Pakistan, Batarosti Patnanistan, which essentially means we want our Pakistan without Pandit men, but with the women. And I remember my mother had taken out a knife and she said, if these men have to come, we'll have to protect our honor, and I'll kill myself and your sister, and then your father, and you figure out what you need to do. But next day, we realized that this is not something which had happened in my neighborhood, my locality alone. It is something that happened all over Kashmir Valley, in every village, every district. People coming out in hordes, in hundreds, and shouting similar slogans. And now we must remember that this is a time when there was no internet, there was no social media network, there was no Facebook, there were no mobile phones. Even the basic telephony, the landline density was very low. So it was all pre-planned to scare us into exile, and the formula was very clear. Kill one and kill him or her in such a brutal fashion that it scares thousands into exile. We all know what happened to a young telecommunication engineer, Mr. D.K. Ganju, in downtown Srinagar, when 3 terrorists came to him, searching for him, and his wife saw them entering the house, and she made him hide in a rice drum, in an empty rice drum in the attic. Now the terrorists searched throughout the house, and they could not find him, and then they left. Now in old Srinagar, as all of us know, the houses are pretty close to each other, and while he was hiding in this rice drum, one of his neighbors, a lady, saw him hiding in the drum, and when the 3 terrorists were leaving, she signaled to them that this man was hiding in the drum. And they returned, and they shot him dead in that drum and forced his wife to eat that blood-soaked rice. Now, as far as I am concerned, D.K. Ganju was not killed by these 3 terrorists. He was killed by his neighbor, who signaled to the terrorists that this gentleman was hiding in that particular rice drum. Girja Tiku, an innocent laboratory assistant in a distant village in Kashmir,
abducted by her own colleagues, by her own neighbors, raped in a moving car, and then cut alive on an electric saw. So this is the kind of brutality we face, and this is not about 2 or 3 or 5 prominent people being killed on the streets. Professors, academics, teachers, doctors, nurses, poets, writers, unemployed, housewives, pregnant women. And that is why all of us must have a consensus on what happened in Kashmir in 1990, because there is some kind of ambivalence when we speak about Kashmir. I was at the Jawaharlal Nehru University very recently, and I was watching 3 films, short films, made by 3 Kashmiri filmmakers. Even in those 3 films, there was some kind of ambivalence about the number of people who had to flee from Kashmir in 1990. One film said 300,000, the next film said 350,000, the other film said 400,000. Now let us put at least in this house, in this small room, records straight once for all. And we must all remember this data when we quote it in conferences, when we quote it to each other, when we quote it to our friends. In January 1990, there were 75,343 Kashmiri Pandit houses, which roughly comes to about 350,000, maybe 400,000 people. The government of J&K says that 219 Kashmiri Pandits were killed. It's a blatant lie, ladies and gentlemen. 786 Kashmiri Pandits were killed in Kashmir from September 14, 1989 onwards. But that is, these are pure killings. As far as I'm concerned, after we migrated from Kashmir Valley and came to terms with harsh reality of the dusty plains of India, the first scorching, the first disaster, the first summer of our lives, when we were put in these refugee camps set on the outskirts of Jammu city on a land infested with snakes and scorpions. How many of us, especially the elderly people, lost their lives? In 1990, itself 24 people lost their lives because of sunstrokes and snake and scorpion bites. Now, as far as I'm concerned, these are also murders. So many diseases we suffered from post-exile, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which was unknown to us. Stress-induced heart diseases, anemia, depression, drop in fertility rates. We have a negative growth rate right now. We lost everything. Now in the last 23 years, what has happened is that not only are we in a state of permanent exile, it's been almost a quarter of a century, and nobody is bothered about us. When we left Kashmir Valley in 1990, we had a certain idea about the rest of the India. We thought we were living in a country which belongs to us because we paid a price for 2 things. For upholding the national flag, the state of Jammu and Kashmir, for upholding our religious identity. Now when we left, we thought that the rest of India was with us. It was not. Nobody cared about us. No media cared about us. No international group, no international policy group, European delegation, etc. Nobody cared about us. For them, it was a black and white situation where they brought in highlight the state excesses. So here was a group of people who were victims of state oppression. But what the media and the international community chose to ignore is that the same set of people had brutalized another set of people who happened to be Kashmiri Pandits in this case. Massacre after massacre. Even after 1990, a handful of us, those of us who stayed back, what happened to them? Sangrampura, 1997, 7 Kashmiri Pandit men lying outside their homes, shot dead. 1998, a small sleepy hamlet in central Kashmir, Ganderbal Bandhama, 23 Kashmiri Pandits, 11 women, 2 children shot dead. One lone survivor who was 14 years old, who I met during the research of my book. is the lone survivor of Bandhama massacre. When I was researching this book, I was going through some of the reports which were available on the internet, filed by local Kashmiri reports on Bandhama. And it was the typical story, the typical propaganda. The sight of Kashmiri women and men wailing over these dead bodies. And I thought I must meet this person whose name is Vinod Kumar Dhar, who was 14 years old when his whole family and extended family was wiped out in a matter of few minutes. And he remembers that these whole bodies in January 1998, they were all lying outside his house in the courtyard. And he was so young and he was so numb with pain that he thought that the bodies must be getting cold. So he brought out quilts from inside his house and put it over his family and extended family, till the police came early in the morning next day. I think in the 17 years of my life, I have never been so persistent as I was with him, because he would not speak. He was in Jammu. He's a government employee now, a 4th class government employee. That is one mehrbani the government of India has done on him, that they have given him a 4th class job in the state secretariat. I spoke to him so many times over the phone, and he was so reluctant, and I know why, to speak to me. But I persisted so many times, and then finally, when he spoke to me, that is when we realized what happened in Bandhama. He told me very clearly what had happened. It was the night of Shab Qadr, which is a holy festival for the Muslims. It is the night when the Holy Quran is being recited, narrated by Jibreel to Prophet Muhammad. He said when the militants came to kill his family, the villagers, his own neighbors, increased the volume of the loudspeaker in the mosque so that the noise of the shots could be muffled. And the next day, pictures splashed all over, the same neighbors wailing over the dead bodies. So for us, I think the bigger betrayal has, more than what has shaken us, is not the exodus itself, but the denial of what happened to us. In the last 23 years, we have been fed on this false propaganda that there was this one person, the former governor of Jammu and Kashmir, Mr. Jagmohan, who was responsible for our exodus. That he was like the Pied Piper of Hamlin. He just played his pipe, and all of us, 350,000 people, 400,000 people, followed him to the dusty plains of Jammu. That is not true, ladies and gentlemen. We fled because our own neighbors, our own friends, our own colleagues turned against us. Now let me take a minute to make you understand what is happening in Kashmir now. We have been out since 23 years. A handful of families are left, and they are being used as a showpiece to show to the world how secular we are. Most of us, some of us go back to Kashmir Valley in the summer especially. And next time when you go, you must notice one thing, that nobody, doesn't matter who you meet, maybe a taxiwala or a houseboat owner or a hotel owner, anybody or your former neighbor colleague, he'll invariably ask you this question: till when are you here? That's the first question that they'll ask you. So as long as you're coming as tourists, spending your hard-earned money on houseboats, on taxis, on hotels, on handicrafts, on carpets, they're fine. But the moment you say that, hey, this is the land where my ancestors have lived for thousands of years. This is the land from where my ancestors took pilgrimages to central Tibet, propagating Buddhism, painting some magnificent murals all the way from Ladakh till central Tibet. This is the place where Guru Padmasambhava Rinpoche, who is known as Second Buddha, spent a major portion of his life drinking from the knowledge reservoir of Kashmir. It is this place where my ancestors translated the Buddhist Lotus Sutra into Chinese. It is this place where my ancestor Kalhana wrote a magnum opus called Rajtarangini, which is considered as one of the world's most extraordinary historical works. That history is completely wiped off. So you come as a tourist, you're welcome. The moment you say we're back here, people will have a problem with that. In the last so many years, there's been a deliberate cultural effacement where all the ancient names of places which are related to us, the names have been changed. Shankaracharya has become Takht-i-Sulaiman. Anantnag has become Islamabad. 600 temples, more than 600 temples, some of them dating even before the Bamyan Buddhas, have been vandalized and burned. They are finished. So this whole game plan of finishing any sign which would tell the world that here was this one small community who spent their whole life in the pursuit of knowledge. In the 80s, I remember, there used to be this coffee house, some of you would remember, in the heart of Srinagar, where some of us would meet and discuss stuff like existentialism. There was a man my father used to know who was so fond of the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. His name was Jawahar. He was nicknamed Jawahar Sartre. So the first target of the Islamist insurgency was that coffee house, the India Coffee House in 1989. There was a bomb blast and it was shut the next moment. And Sartre is in exile for the last 23 years. What we now need to do is, I've been speaking to some of you and you're busy with your lives and all of us are busy with our lives. But we must make sure that we visit Kashmir, even as a tourist. It is very important to have some kind of foothold. It is not important whether you have 200 people next to you or 1 people. You must tell your story to everyone. You must tell them what happened to us, to this small community in the winter of 1990, in the autumn of 1947. They must realize, because there is only one narrative which has dominated the whole discourse in the last 25 years. It is very important for us, the younger generation, to understand where they come from. That is one reason why I wrote this book, ladies and gentlemen. I think I started thinking about this book when I was in college, which was in 93, 96. But that time I was really young and my language was very raw. I did not know how to write a book. But I think from 2000 onwards, I made some serious efforts at writing this book. I wrote passages after passages and then I gave up because there were certain portions of the book which I found extremely difficult to write. Especially the passages dealing with my own brother's murder. My brother Ravi was dragged out of a bus along with his 2 other Pandit colleagues and shot dead in 1997. So, in between about 2004-2005, because by the virtue of my other work with the Maoists in Central and East India, I wrote a couple of other books, and I'm glad I wrote those books because those books took my mind away from my own story. And when I returned to it in 2010, I could remember in flashes all that what happened to us, not only in January 1990, but even later. The suffering and humiliation of doorless toilets in Jammu, the ignominy of sleeping on newspaper sheets for weeks altogether, without table fan in those torn tents in a refugee camp. That is why it is important for us to remember our story. That is why every time when you meet here on Shivratri, on Diwali, we must say to each other, next year in Kashmir. Thank you. Well, the majority of response from Kashmir was on expected lines. They rejected the narrative completely. They've been saying that it's a blatant lie. I'm also glad that I've started a sort of a cottage industry in Kashmir now, where these unknown, unidentified blogs have come up, which are not only scrutinizing on a day-to-day basis what I'm writing about Kashmir, but any story which I've done from January 2013 onwards, from day onwards when my book has been published. So even if I'm doing a story from Arunachal Pradesh, they put it up on the blog and say, oh, he's been lying about Arunachal Pradesh. But I was aware of it, and that is why I was very aware of the fact that this book will have to go through a lot of scrutiny. And that is why every single incident in this book has been validated and revalidated in a very strict journalistic regimen. That's why they've not been able to attack the narrative, and they'll go around, very vague attacks on how elite we were, how we connived with the Dogra Maharaja and all this stuff. But having said that, there's a very small percentage, very small handful of young Kashmiri Muslims, both boys and girls, who were born after 1990, and they have no idea of the kind of society in which Kashmir was before 1990. They have no experience of living with Kashmiri Pandits, and they have been fed on these stories that we were some zamindars and landlords and we were being driven out after this revolution. Now, when they're reading this book, they are going back to their families and saying that, hey, we were never told this story. So these people, some of them are in touch with me, and they're from very good families. They're educated. As far as they are concerned, I still have hope from Kashmir Valley.
Did you get a similar response from the rest of the area?
Yes, the response from the rest of India has been overwhelming. Many people are in touch with me. I'm overwhelmed by response from my own community who have taken time to write to me, to organize trips and events like these. Most of the people from my own community were writing to me, they say, oh hey, it's my own story. To just say, yes, it is your story. It is not my personal story alone, because it doesn't matter where you lived in Kashmir in 1990, whether you lived in Chandpura or Srinagar or Central Kashmir or North Kashmir or South Kashmir. Most of us, all of us, have gone through same experiences. The names have changed, but the experiences are the same. And that is why I say that it's not my story, it is the story of my community. But I'm also surprised at the kind of ignorance the rest of India has about our story. Nobody has heard of the story. I'm receiving emails from South India saying, oh, we heard about something like Kashmiri Pandits and their story, but we had no idea. We had no idea about the magnitude of the suffering you had to go in 1990 or even before that. So that has been a pleasant experience so far.
Rahulji, you have actual numbers, how many Kashmiri Pandits have gone back? I'm not talking about the folks who are going just for, let's say, a month, 2 months, but actually, whether it's...
After the Prime Minister's 2008 package, which he announced, God knows why, from Akhnur Bridge on the outskirts of Jammu City, on the international border, saying that the Kashmiri Pandits the youngsters are most welcome to return and will rehabilitate them, etc., etc. So he announced thousands of jobs, out of which only 1,416 have been taken up so far by young Kashmiri Pandit men and women, mostly teaching jobs and other engineering jobs in the state government. These 1,416 people have been put up in 5 temporary security camps in ghetto-like situations across Kashmir Valley. And I must tell you the kind of experience they've had in Kashmir so far. Many of them, I would say about 15-20 of them, have returned to Jammu or wherever they came from. There was a young girl who chose to stay in Pulwama in South Kashmir, and one day she was returning from her job in a school, and she was accosted by these three men in a Maruti 800, and one of them told her that please sit in the car, we'll offer you a lift, which she politely declined. And then he said that ever since you come here, I can't sleep, so why don't you get married to me? So the woman, the girl left the next morning. She left her jobs. But the security is least of their concern. What they're facing right now is a lot of harassment, a lot of discrimination at the hands of their Muslim colleagues all across Kashmir, where they are, I met some of them, and they're suffering from blood pressure now. Some of them were so tense at certain points, especially in this camp in West, in a hospital in Kazimur.
I have a question to you.
Yes,
You are from a media, so am I. Why don't I see that Indian media taking this as a big issue? They are still, you can go off the record.
No, there's no off the record. As far as I'm concerned, I'm very clear about these things, and I'm willing to go on record. There are a couple of issues. One is what I said earlier, that the media is either ignorant about this, or they see it as largely as a black and white situation. Because it is fashionable to talk about state excesses in Jammu and Kashmir, the brutality of Indian army, etc., which is a legitimate question, but it is not something us versus them. Both these beings have a right to coexist. But what they largely fail to recognize is that the same set of people have victimized another set of people. That is one thing. The other thing is that, from my own experience, I can tell you, before this book, I wrote a book called Hello Buster, which deals with the story of the Maoist insurgency in India. Now, this book is like a Bible in Jawaharlal Nehru University. Every room has it. These 40-50 people who think they run the intellectual discourse of India have read it and they have commended me for it. But when I wrote this book, the same people refused to talk to me, because somehow it is fashionable to talk about the plight of the indigenous tribals in the jungle of Bastar, or the plight of the Manipuris in northeast India, or the plight of riot victims elsewhere in Gujarat or Muzaffarnagar. But somehow it is not fashionable to talk about the plight of Kashmiri Pandits. So that is a flaw in the discourse, especially among the left liberals, who have so far in the last more than 6 decades refused to understand and recognize the dangers of Muslim fundamentalism.
Rahul Ji, I want to ask, I am a non-Kashmiri Pandit also. I am from Hyderabad.
You are from?
I am from Hyderabad, really.
Okay.
I just come here for my daughter every time, for 10 years. The heart-rending stories that you have told, it is really painful. But what I would not want to ask is, that as a lady has finished, in India, other parts of the other than Kashmir, the people are not aware of what the things have taken place. So how a common person or a media or anybody can bring it to a focus and attention to the people at large. That is most important. Because as a group, Kashmiri Pandit have suffered, that we vaguely know. But as we hear these stories, really the people, large mass of the people come to know, probably it will be a good listening.
I think even before I wrote this book, I've sort of made it my duty to share this story with anyone who is bothered to listen. So it has never bothered me whether I'm addressing a group of 200 people or a group of 2 people or a single person. So as far as I'm concerned, I've been doing that for the last 23 years. And I think it's a duty of all of us to share and spread this story. The failing is partially on our part also, because we failed to tell our own story. Now this book has come out and I'm hoping that other youngsters will follow suit and they'll write more about it. Not only write about it, talk about it, make films about it, write PhD dissertations over it. I would, for example, be, for a lack of a better word, delighted to read a narrative from someone who has lived in a refugee camp in the 90s. There were so many, I've never lived in a refugee camp, though I've lived in other worse places, in modern dwellings, etc. But I would be, it would be important that someone who's lived in a refugee camp in the 90s writes about his or her experiences of that time. Similar narratives I'm hoping will come so that we're not forgotten completely. I think that's the only way to keep this alive.
What is the Indian government trying or have done to fix the problem?
The short answer to your question is nothing.
What has the Indian government said you were going to do to fix the problem? Have they said anything? Or?
The Indian government has not sent anyone. Sometimes some prime minister or some political leader will come and they will make some noises in the state assembly and say that Kashmir is incomplete without Kashmiri Pandits, or they must return. But when they say return, they treat it as a case as if we are victims of some earthquake or a flood, and that we must return now that our lives have been rebuilt. What they fail to understand is that we are victims of a political disaster, which is not by natural causes. It's a man-made, it's a political disaster, where this small community became the target of an ethnic cleansing in 1990. That is primarily because we're not a formidable vote bank. We're spread all across the world from Jammu to Johannesburg. So we are a small community, nobody bothers about us. So they're not serious about taking any step which would lead to our return to the Kashmir Valley.
Thank you for that, Dr. Rahul. My question is on this concept of the vote bank, because as we know, all over the world, political decisions are made essentially on vote banks, and India is a prime example of that. How do you consider taking 400,000 to 500,000 people and making them a lever into becoming, a bigger vote bank? Because you can't just wait for centuries for that vote bank to grow. But Muslim fundamentalism is becoming a worldwide scourge. And India, it's not just limited to Kashmir. So how do you sort of lever yourself into that, so that it's not just a question of telling the story and creating focus? Any thoughts on that?
No, I personally think we can never become a vote bank. Like I said, because we're scattered all over, we have our lives, our jobs to take care of. And that is that's the only thing that has sustained us throughout these years. Otherwise, we would have perished by now. That is why it is important for us, apart from talking to each other. You are based in the United States and everywhere. That is why it is important for us to speak to international policy groups and make them understand that. That is what I'm going to do in the next couple of weeks, to make them understand the perils of radical Islam, and I'll tell them that it is not something which is geographically located. They know what happened in 1999 when 3 terrorists were released in exchange of the ill-fated IC-814 plane, Air India plane. One of them was Masood Azhar, who was a founder of Jaish-e-Mohammed. The other was Mushtaq Zargar, who was a Kashmiri terrorist from the Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front, who was responsible for killing of so many innocent Kashmiris, including Kashmiri Pandits. The third was a young man who was fond of playing chess and indulging in arm wrestling. The government of India chose to negotiate with these terrorists, and all these 3 were freed in Kandahar. 2 years later, this person, who was who was fond of playing chess, was the same person who wired $100,000 from UAE to a person called Mohammed Atta. Now we know what Mohammed Atta did. He's the same person who planned the abduction and the subsequent beheading of my fellow journalist Daniel Pearl. So we must make them understand that this is not something which is geographically located now. It has the tentacles, it has enough tentacles to spread from one person, one geographic location to other part of the globe. So it cannot, the West, especially the United States, cannot be hypocritical about it. It cannot be a jihadi terrorist in Boston and an unidentified gunman in Baramulla. It doesn't work like that any longer.
You do have to follow the agency model, like, American Jewish Council. They have bodies all over, like, what Jewish has done, that is a remarkable thing. Like, no land to the land for themselves, the land of Israel. I'm an alumni and I see how they take pride in where they are. We do have something to follow back.
Absolutely.
And they will be more than happy to work with our community, and they are really working with Hindus, like, they're taking their voice, because the pain is a pain, no matter it is you or me.
Absolutely, I agree.
Rahul, you talked about ignorance. I understand part of your idea of writing the book is to spread the awareness. Now my question is, are you also planning any follow-up action? The reason I'm asking this question is, some of us here or elsewhere might be interested in contributing to that. Are you planning any follow-up action apart from the awareness?
Well, I'm a full-time journalist, and what I can do is, apart from little work which I do for my community, is to spread the word. And spreading, today when I'm standing here in front of you, it is a part of those efforts I'm making. I'll be speaking later at various American universities and think tanks, including the Carnegie Endowment Center. So that is all I can do as far as I'm concerned.
Rahulji, if you look at the Kashmiri story from the dimension of demographics and the social aspects, so demographically, there are various segments of population, people like us who do not go back to Kashmir except for tourism or in late retirement. There are many well settled in India who may not want to go back. And there is a good chunk of people who are 24 plus years of age today who don't have this social bond with Kashmir because they never lived it. So it leaves a smaller section of people who are economically not as well off or socially so tied to the concept of Kashmir that they may want to go back. How do you see the relationship of Kashmiris and Kashmir evolving over the next decade or two?
I divide this issue into two parts. One is the reluctance on the part of some of us to return to Kashmir. I think that is only partially true. Some of us, because of the jobs we're doing now, or the fact that we're so far away from Kashmir, that we may not want to return. But you'll be surprised at the number of people who will return once the situation normalizes. That is one thing. The other thing is, it's not about whether we return there or not. It is also about whether we can return, whether we have that freedom to return or not. So as long as we don't have that freedom, we cannot do anything. Once that freedom, is brought to us, then whether we decide to return or not is a different story. But we must have that freedom to return and live in Kashmir without any kind of fear. That is something which is not happening right now, and I don't see it happening in the near future as far as the situation in Jammu and Kashmir is concerned.
I think people are traumatized by all the experiences that others have had or they have had. I don't think they have the courage to even think about going back. So the effort is not there. That's why they've given up. Most of the Kashmiris have given up.
Some have, but some of us have not.
Yes.
So
that's a very
and I'm only hoping that once the situation normalizes in Kashmir Valley and when some of us return, others also follow suit. They might live elsewhere, but at least they should have the freedom to come to Kashmir, not as a tourist, but as someone who is a part of that land.
Can I say something? I mean, to your question, I mean, the point.
No, that's okay.
It's a follow-up on it. We have been thrown out of Kashmir for 7 times, and we have come back and been there. So it's the same story. It's just a matter of the fact that we will be there.
Actually, my question is on slightly different way, which is in India politically, unfortunately or fortunately, the biggest known Kashmiri Pandit family was Jawaharlal Nehru. And why I said unfortunately is that although because a lot of Congress side is with them, but a lot of Hindu the party who push the Hindu agenda, for them that family is basically untouchable. All right. So basically, because of course this story I have heard from a lot of my close friends, and so I have always felt that maybe that is a reason behind it, that Hindus, because for them the real known family about Kashmiri Pandits is Jawaharlal Nehru's family, and they don't want to do any favor for them. And then this Congress, for where this family is, they are anyway always in a way pro-Muslims. So in between the two veins, the Kashmiri Pandits get ignored. What do you say about that?
I don't think we can equate Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru with the Gandhi family right now. They're elsewhere. But having said that, let's for a moment forget what the Congress did, what Mr. Rajiv Gandhi did when he went to Srinagar several times and chose to visit the refugee camps, or was partially responsible for the mess in which we find ourselves into. The Bharatiya Janata Party led Indian government was in power for many years in Delhi, and their response, I'm afraid, has been worse than the Congress party in many ways. And it's not only about Kashmir, it's also about the way you've dealt with certain policy issues. For God's sake, you cannot mobilize an entire Indian army on the border after your parliament is attacked and recite poetry, Badal Mandra Rahe, and you mobilize the entire army, and you more soldiers have died in Operation Parakram than in Operation Vijay in Kargil, and the next day you say Badal Chadkaye. So that is not the way you deal with the issue. So the BJP is equally, as far as I'm concerned, the BJP is equally responsible for this mess which we are into today.
Rahul, when you talk to the policy think tank, these policy think tanks are running in government, and I agree with you on not having moral improvements or strategies. But in July 1992, Christian Amanpour told President Clinton why he wasn't doing anything in Bosnia. 20,000 Bosnian Muslims after the Srebrenica massacre were asked to leave. And the entire West was outraged, and we Americans, we went into Bosnia to quell ethnic cleansing of 20,000 Bosnian Muslims. So it was the proximity in time and the dichotomy of the community represents is not geographic. This is all over the world. So when you talk to these policy think tanks and you present this contrast to them, how do they react? What is the response?
Well, I've not had many opportunities to present my case to at places like the Carnegie, which I'm hoping to do now, and I think I'll really have to wait for the response. But in my private conversations, with diplomats and other responsible people from the diplomatic corps in New Delhi and elsewhere, I think what I've done is basically told them about what has happened to us, and I was surprised to see that many of them having even ignorant about the story of Kashmiri Pandits.
Do you believe that?
Yes. There was, after my book was out, there was a small American delegation which went to Jammu and Srinagar, and they met some leaders, separatist leaders as well as mainstream political leaders, and some leaders from the Kashmiri Pandit community also. And they have been talking to their sources in Kashmir, because a lot of money is being routed through some of these groups into Kashmir, and they said that how come you never told us about this part of the story? We're completely ignorant about this story. So slightly, all I'm saying is that things are changing brick by brick. It will take some time, but we will reach there.
Your interactions with the administrative, the cream of Indian governments like the chief secretaries and foreign secretaries and all that. And usually what we hear is that they drive the Indian politics. They are responsible for driving it. So why? And I know they have sometimes their hands are tied at times. But in your conversations with those folks who are policymakers who drive the country's think tank, what has been their response?
I think most of them have no understanding of the Kashmir problem. Not very long ago, I met this senior IPS officer from Kashmir who told me that he was being summoned to the Ministry of Home Affairs for a presentation on infiltration, because infiltration happens on a pretty large scale from certain areas, especially along the line of control. And he went for this presentation in front of the Kashmir division of the Ministry of Home Affairs. And while he was giving his presentation, the person in charge told him that, officer, tell me, why can't we just shut the gates so that the terrorists don't infiltrate the war? So perhaps she had an idea of the Wagah border where the gates are shut in the evening at sunset, and she thought that in Poonch or Rajouri we have a similar situation. And this is the Joint Secretary level IAS officer who is in charge of Kashmir Division of Ministry of Home Affairs. Also, in the last few years, what has happened is that Kashmir has become a cottage industry. It is like a hen which lays golden eggs. So it is in the interest of everyone, including politicians in Pakistan, in India, separatist groups, army, paramilitary forces, bureaucrats, to keep this conflict alive. Because a lot of money, more than what you and I can imagine, is being earned through Kashmir.
So does this mean that the people at the secretary level, they have been deliberately kept over there for ignorant of the fact what's going on?
No, I mean, they just don't care about it. There have been many occasions, many phases in the past 2 years where a serious intervention from the Indian state could have yielded some results, but the government is so stuck in its own mess that it does not have any kind of vision or any kind of policy or any kind of blueprint to deal with the Kashmir mess. One day you are spending your whole energy on one particular separatist leader. Everyone is giving you money. The Ministry of Home Affairs is giving you money. The RAW is giving you money. IB is giving you money. Army is giving you money. So for 6 months he's a hero. So 6 months you fed him so much money that he's so fat. After 6 months you completely shun him out and start spending this energy on someone else. Now they got so used to that kind of money that they do not want this to end in any way. And that is the mess you have created in Kashmir today.
This is a larger picture as far as Kashmir is concerned. Vis-a-vis Pakistan. It has nothing to do with the Kashmiri Pandits going back.
Yeah, Kashmiri Pandits are just a small cog in the wheel. Now, you and I know that even Pakistan, if it tries for 5,000 years, Kashmir can never become a part of Pakistan. But for India, it is a real estate. So that real estate will never go away from the clutches of India. But as far as Kashmiri Pandits are concerned, the return will remain Western dream.
What about the people, those who are living in the state? Because there is a drama talk about, like, independent Kashmir, which people don't know about, like, where you want to be exactly. What is this independent Kashmir issue is all about? Now this guy, 100 days old baby, comes here and he talks to Obama, oh no, we should interfere and get the Kashmir issue.
Who's this baby?
This,
Nawaz Sharif was there yesterday.
100 days old baby. It's like, how long is
100 days old baby.
I mean, it's a part of the same malice. People, I think in Kashmir, are very aware of the fact that there's nothing called Azadi. It will never happen. So 2-3 strains are running parallel in Kashmir now. One is this section of people who are upper middle class or who are from such families. They have a lot of connection with India and they know in their hearts. These are people who their children study everywhere in Jawaharlal University, in Delhi University, elsewhere. As well, they're in medical colleges, engineering colleges. They know that their future lies with India, but they are silenced in the name of the cause. That is one portion. The other portion is one portion of the elites, which gets its sustenance from the same jihadi industry. They're getting money, they're deriving money out of it. At the same time, there is this whole section of Kashmiris, especially in downtown Srinagar, in rural Kashmir. And every 3-4 months when you visit, after every 3-4 months, you feel there's a radical change. That this Wahhabi strain of Islam is spreading very fast. You see these young girls wearing Arabian abayas and headscarf, which was never the case in Kashmir when we were growing up, or even in the 90s and early 2000s when we used to go there on assignments. So that is one significant change which we see in Kashmir. And there's this whole generation of Kashmiris who were born post 1990. And they've only witnessed curfews and crackdowns and people being killed around them. So that has led to a lot of damage. Sometimes I travel in downtown Srinagar around these places and I speak to some of these youngsters who indulge in snow pelting on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes it is very scary to hear them talk to each other because sometimes they don't know that I'm a Kashmiri and I understand the language. So that is one advantage I have sometimes when I really need to understand what they are talking about. But I really get scared sometimes when I hear them talking to each other. The way they talk about death and this boy was running and he fell and his brain came out. They talk like this. So that is very scary.
Mr. Pandita, let me first commend the service level.
Oh, finally you got it done, right?
Yes, I finally got the turn and thank you. I'm not a born Kashmiri Pandit, but I grew up in a Kashmiri Pandit family and it's my closest friend, like my brother. I grew up with them and I saw all the episodes of 1989 to 1991, 92. They used to play all the videos, people used to gather and I used to be part of it and I saw all the what happened there. But I agree with you that the community was not prepared at that time to act and retaliate, although could have been, but was not prepared. But one of the good things the community has done is, within a very short span of time, it's just a quarter century, being refugees, we have seen Kashmiri Pandits come out and they have established themselves in the leadership positions at a lot of places. They are doctors, they are engineers, they are in leadership positions and everywhere. Now, same thing Tuesday after Holocaust. They were literally reduced to nothing, and they came up and they established themselves and they fought back. But what they did was they were together, they fought again together. But what can be done to really bring together the whole community so that, and it's not a small number, even whatever number of Kashmiri Pandits around the world is at this point, if they get together, they are substantial to make their voice heard. So, and I know you're taking this effort to make this happen, but this needs to happen even more. What can be done?
You know I don't have all the answers. I've just written this book. But yeah, sure, I agree. One reason why we have excelled, no matter where we are, is by the virtue of our education. We may eat once a day, and that is what some of us did after 1990, but we made sure that the children go to the best of the schools and get the best possible education. We lived under tin roofs and tin sheds. But we made sure that all the entrance exams, the forms are filled, and the children go through those entrance exams, etc. So that is the only saving grace, and that is true for every small community, like the Jews you mentioned. Communities who are small must make sure that whatever they do, each member, whatever he or she does, they excel in it. So as far as that is concerned, I think the Kashmiri Pandits have set up a brilliant example. So on an individual basis, we are doing very well for ourselves. But somehow as a collective force, we've not been able to do what the Jews have done for many years for themselves, or other communities have done many years for themselves. But I think it's an evolving phase, and I don't know what happens in the next 5 years.
Just need to work at it.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's a big thing, yes.
Launching 3 snapshots in time. So 1950 to 1990, many Kashmiris were living in Kashmiri Pandits, but few left. The state of industry in Kashmir has been pathetic all the years. Those who were living in Kashmir didn't have optimal jobs. Those who left probably did much better. The generation in 1990 to 2000, they paid the price, they died, they were suffering, etc. Dislocation, relocation, everything else. And the generation after that is young people who are struggling, growing, finding roots in the rest of India. Would you recommend to those people now it is a viable choice for them to go back to Kashmir? As against strive in India and thrive there?
Well, you're right about the job. I must also share this with you because when you speak to others and sometimes these questions come up, we heard about this. I'm sure you must have heard about this in Northwestern University also. For those of you who have dealt with my dear friend Ghulam Nabi Fai, there's this whole narrative they've built around how elite we were and how we were in charge of all the government jobs in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. In 1990, there were 350,000 jobs, state government jobs, in the entire state of Jammu and Kashmir. Can you take a guess how many of them belong to Kashmiri Pandits? Any one of them? Out of 350,000 jobs in the entire state of Jammu and Kashmir, how many jobs belong to Kashmiri Pandits? State government. In 1990, just before migration. Any wild guess?
Now it's around 50.
It was 13,000. Out of these 13,000 jobs, 6,000 jobs were teaching jobs. And there were about 2,200 to 2,500 central government jobs that Kashmiri Pandits had in 1990. And most of them are over now. There are hardly any government jobs left for Kashmiri Pandits now. But coming back to the same question, my generation spent a lot of time in regaining some of what we had lost in Kashmir. So we gave our lives. So did other generations before us. So I think you asked this question in another form, really. But I think it's really a matter of choice. The choice should be with us whether we want to return or not. And when the choice is made available to us. Because I've been speaking to a lot of people. I have friends who who do some work here and there, and I interact with the community on a daily basis. Even I am surprised at the number of people who are willing to return to Kashmir. So maybe once we get that opportunity, when that situation arises, you and I will be surprised at how many people will actually turn up and return.
I want to tell you. Going back to Kashmir is a different thing, and having freedom to go back as you are asking that is very important. And to start with this, to really the public or the world should know the right or the things that have happened. Two things what I want to say. One thing is congregation of such meetings in a large scale, extensively and intensively, every public meeting, and also the books that you release. Or books like that, I am not propagating your books, but books like that you have written, that should be extensively distributed, and there should be good number of sponsors.
I agree.
And I would, for one, would like to do that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you, Rahulji. On behalf of all the Kashmiris in Chicago, I would like to present Rahulji a small token of appreciation. Something for him to remember as well. I'd like to thank Rahulji, a lot of memories that we all had by going through the 89 and 90, what we lived through, and the way he's expressed in the book, and he talked about this, as at least I read it, reminded me of the days that I spent in it. This event would not have been possible without a lot of people seated in this crowd, a lot of people who donate money to help this event, and a lot of people who spend a lot of valuable time. I'm going to name a few people. I may not end up naming everybody. If I miss somebody, please do forgive me. I would like to thank Sanjala Rajwandar, Ravina Manchu, Rana, Vishal Manju, Suresh, Sanjay Bhatt, Sanjeev Daftari, Sharad, and a host of people who got together. This event, Raj Kaur, Sandeep Kar, and I just 5 minutes.
And Naveen.
So I would like to thank everybody here for coming for this meeting, and giving us your valuable time. We do appreciate it. Dinner is served behind, so.
There's an announcement about the book, so
Again, we will be taking orders for the books, so if you're interested, just let us know.